Hello and welcome to the final iteration of the 2023 college football season. This is the CFB Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and joined by my friend and co-host throughout all this entire season, 14 plus weeks, Jake Kuchek. We are officially arriving at the national championship game between the Washington Huskies, America's team, if you will, and the Michigan Wolverines. I don't know if I have many more close games for this Huskies team left in me. I am literally like on the morphine drip on the floor throughout the last game, just dead, having to be resuscitated constantly by the family because these games are really stressing me out, putting a lot of years on me. And this is title game, I'm sure, is going to be even closer. No blowouts. It'd be really surprising if this game turned out to a blowout, but we're here to talk about this natty game in full, give each of our takes, our perspective, how we think it'll go. We'll be talking about the showdown slate in general, because obviously that's all that is available here. There's a big $200,000 tournament to first, $20 entry with like 35,000 people. That will be a big chop, of course, probably a chop, I'd say. Maybe I shouldn't say for sure, but we'll also talk PrizePicks, any betting opportunities. I have some info pulled up here on some of the more popular prop bets from BetMGM and a couple of other stuff here. Jake, the season is just about done. One more game. How are you feeling about this one coming up? And overall, what are your thoughts on who might win here? Just your initial take.
Yeah, man. August to January. It has been a long haul doing this, and it's been fun and it's been profitable. And I'm certain that two things will happen tomorrow. Number one, we're going to get a better championship game than we did last year. It'll be a much more enjoyable game. It won't be the massive, completely overmatched TCU team going into this one. And number two, first Michigan first down, Walt is going to go absolutely wild on tilt. That is just a lock, mortal lock of what's going to happen. Yeah, man, I'm excited for this one. Obviously, a little bit different for you. We've got a dog in the fight, a husky to be specific, and so I'm pulling for you. But yeah, this should be a good one, man. It's two well-matched teams, and Michigan, if there's anything that hasn't truly been tested for Michigan, it's probably like the true depth of their secondary, with multiple receivers that can burn them, and so obviously Jalen Milroe is like not that dude. He's very talented, but he's not the guy that's going to throw for 500 yards on you or anything. And the Big Ten, especially with Kyle McCord being at Ohio State, the Big Ten hasn't really shown anybody to Michigan that has that ability or talent, and so it's going to be interesting, man. I think that there's definitely a path to Harbaugh and Michigan being surprised by, and it's not even like a speed thing. The way that everybody said, okay, Michigan's not going to be able to handle SEC speed. Not even that. It's scheme, and it's the vast array of wide receiver talent, and how that is complemented by a quarterback like Penix, that it's just so precise and surgical. It's like almost the perfect recipe to get Michigan kind of on their back heels going into this one. So I don't want to hype you up too much, but I'm excited. I'm excited for the matchup and how it plays out, and you can't wait to get into it.
Yeah, and this is the matchup that I want. I remember when it was known that we're going to be in the playoffs and the four teams, and you off air, you would ask me like, who did I want between them? Did I want Michigan? Did I want Bama? And Michigan was a team that I thought we actually could match up with quite well. I didn't really want Alabama. So this was the matchup I wanted. Could be saying something different at the end of the game if they beat us. But it is a 4.5 point spread at the moment, Michigan. It's a 56.5 total. Couple of thoughts from me on this one. Jim Harbaugh, the hate for him comes pretty deep for the Pacific Northwest. You know, the 49ers Seahawks battles in the early to mid 2010s that we had with those Harbaugh teams. So you know, we have that going for us. Also, this is an interesting bit of tidbit. It's the fourth and final time, because obviously we're going into a 12-team playoff next year, that two undefeated teams have faced off in the title game. So kind of a nice little swan song. The other times happened 3 times in a row. 2018, Clemson defeating Bama. 2019, that LSU dream team defeating Clemson. And then 2020, the COVID shortened season in which Alabama beat Ohio State. Ohio State team that won 7 games and made the final and all that controversy. The other thoughts that I had here, kind of just before we get into breaking down the actual slate, or the game itself, I should say. You had mentioned Michigan's defense. I did have that highlighted in my notes, because their defense is obviously pretty premier. 38 sacks this year. They had 5 in the first half alone against Alabama. Their secondary is a hell of a lot better than Texas. I think most people could agree. They allowed a 56% completion rate to opposing quarterbacks this year and 150 yet passing yards, which is, I had to double check that, triple check that. Like, wow, they only allowed that much average. But you had mentioned they didn't really face a team like the Huskies in that conference. And I know everybody, the Big Ten is God's conference. It's the best in the world. SEC is up there. Obviously, they're the true best, but Big Ten just gets the benefit of the doubt more often than not. But looking at all the teams that Michigan played, there wasn't really a team with 3 elite receivers, let alone even, 1 sometimes, but 3 different receivers that they'll have to account for, a tight end group that is better than most people, realize, and a running back in Dylan Johnson that's obviously going to be playing hurt, but it's definitely good enough, even at 70%, to keep defenses honest. So I am feeling pretty good about that, and that Michigan's defense will certainly be tested. And then also the Washington O-line, people, thought Texas was going to be able to generate sacks and stuff to run, but this is the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, which is basically to the best offensive line in the country. No sacks allowed against that Texas D line in the Sugar Bowl. I was very proud of that. And Penix just had, all the time in the world to throw. Some funky stuff at the end there with that injury in the clock. And I really was ready to get screwed over, but we made it through, and certainly going to be a fun matchup here if the O-line can hold Michigan from sacking Penix again here. I think we have a pretty good chance. Injuries before we delve into it. I mentioned Dylan Johnson. So what happened there is he aggravated an existing foot injury that he's been playing with the last month or two. Admits that he won't be 100%, so that's never great. Probably looking at a 60-70% Dylan Johnson. He's not going to get, I don't think, a ton, like 20-plus carries. There are other guys like Tybo Rogers who are going to get some work there to supplement, but it's going to be the passing game here that moves the ball and what we're going to need to see anyway. So he just needs to be adequate enough to where the defense can't cheat. Devin Culp, one of our primary tight ends, he was injured and left the game, but he is good to go. And then our star corner, Jabbar Muhammad, who is a future NFL player, good to go after leaving the Sugar Bowl with an injury as well. Michigan is pretty much all the way healthy. They lost one of their star, I believe it was an O-lineman, potentially, I can't remember, in the Ohio State game, but they have no other injuries. JJ McCarthy, who was banged up heading into the CFP, is good to go, clean bill of health. So it's going to be a full steam ahead with both teams with their best guys and the best team coming out ahead here. So let's get into this slate here. We don't really cover too many showdowns, so I figured the way we'll go here is we'll talk about, captain options that we're looking at, any utility stuff, sneaks, any kind of strategy talk in terms of how to build, because a lot of people don't know how to build with showdowns. The whole 4-2 thing in basketball works a lot. We'll see if that works here for football, but let's get into it. Michigan versus Washington for the national title game, starting with captain options. And of course, there's really obvious, right? Penix, Rome Odunze, Blake Corum, but where is your head at, and where are you kind of looking at there for your primary captain?
Yeah, so for that, you kind of have to look at what are the most similar games to this game that both of these teams have played. And for Michigan, like, there's only really one thing that's anywhere close to a comp, because just the level of competition was nowhere close, other than with Ohio State. Like, that was the only competitive game Michigan played all season was against Ohio State, right? And so what did Ohio State do? They threw it to Marvin Harrison Jr. a lot. 19 and 1 for him. Egbuka also got into the end zone, and And so that's 2 passing touchdowns, and I think 270 something yards for Kyle McCord, who we said all season is just not that guy. Shows me that, a competent passing offense can pass against this Michigan defense. And yes, they have all the accolades, they have all the talent, they have all the numbers. They've played Big Ten offenses all season. And so in terms of who you want to focus on the Washington side, when Washington has the ball, if you can get to a Penix captain one way or another, it's a great thing to do. But realistically, you're putting way too much salary into that captain slot, and he's not really a guy that's going to run all over you like Jalen Milroe had done. Although we did see him run it a little bit in the semifinal game. But I would really just kind of focus on locking on to one of the 3 main receivers per build and making that your captain. And this is very much, it's the championship game. Like, if you're not going to go multiple builds on a showdown for the championship game, when are you, right? So vary your looks, but I'm going to go, optimal lineup is either going to be a Washington receiver or Blake Corum. It'll be one of those 2. And so, there were more similarly styled games for Washington than there have been for Michigan. And so just looking back, probably the 2 most similar matchups for Washington were Oregon and Oregon State, in terms of how those teams, stack up competitively, and also how they kind of attack the defense when they're on offense. And Oregon State was a bit of a mix. Oregon State versus Washington, part 1, it was all run game. It was Bucky Irving and Jordan James doing all the damage, and Troy Franklin too. Like, 154 and 1 shouldn't be ignored, but there were 30 plus carries for almost 200 yards and 2 touchdowns between the backs, and Bo Nix didn't run it at all, which shows me that you can do that against the Washington defense. And we know that. We saw Texas do it last week in the semifinal, and being able to run the ball kind of when they chose to. And the other matchup with Oregon didn't happen that way, and Oregon didn't win either of them. But I think that's, partially, you play the same team twice, you're going to want to mix things up a bit. And we got 2 Terrence Ferguson touchdowns in that one. So I think that's a little bit of an anomaly, but also shows you that, Washington may be a little bit susceptible to tight end play, even though Jatavian Sanders didn't have the world's biggest game that we were maybe hoping for him to have against Washington last week. Well, I guess you probably weren't hoping, but you know what I mean from a DFS perspective. Yeah. And so then we look at the Oregon State matchup, and we've got Damian Martinez just being the entire offense for Oregon State. And I'm sure you watched that one closely, and I don't have to remind you of that. But 26, 123, and 2 for Damian Martinez. They were kind of like, hey, man, you're just going to do everything and control game flow, control clock. And they were down. Like, they were not at any point winning that game, and still chose to just run the ball the entire time. Which, if I'm Jim Harbaugh, looking at, where teams have had a lot of success against Washington without having to risk, passes downfield. And I also know that I have JJ McCarthy versus Blake Corum. I think I'm putting the ball in Blake Corum's hands most of the time. Right. So, just, in terms of schematically how, logic would dictate each of these games go. It's not obvious. It's not not obvious. Like, this is not rocket science. Michigan running the ball, Washington passing the ball. That's what they do, right? Like, that's what those offenses do. But those strengths also fit very well into the weaknesses of the opponent. And so it kind of, there may be, other content that says, oh, Corum's going to be chalky, you have to get off Corum and get onto Edwards, or oh, Roma Dunze is going to be chalky, you have to get off him and get on Jalen Polk. All of that is fine, as long as you are within the tendencies of the offenses and how those tendencies kind of are paired with the weaknesses of the opposing defense. And I think Michigan run, Washington pass is about as simplistic as I can get, and whatever iterations of that can go into your build, great, do it. And if you can get, contrarian, or you can get a little bit of a different build in going for something like that, then all the more power to you. But that's where my focus is now.
Yeah, it's and knowing that most people, those big GPPs, there's going to be a lot of chops and overlap. So without having to get too crazy in captain, like a WR5, you'll be able to play some of those guys like a Donovan Edwards, knowing that Michigan should be able to run the ball. And they're, last week I used some Texas running backs because I knew that two things were going to happen. Washington's not going to allow too many deep balls. Like you saw in the first match against Oregon, which you talked about, Troy Franklin was just completely unstoppable. They did not defend him well. He kept beating them downfield. In the second matchup, they made sure to keep everything in front of them. And that's why you saw those Ferguson touchdowns, and you saw some of that shorter yardage stuff to Tez, because they just didn't want to get beat deep, and they've been making that decision for the last few games, and they have the secondary to actually kind of keep things in front of them, and they did a great job keeping Xavier Worthy dead. Jadavian Sanders, you mentioned, he didn't find the end zone, but he did catch, PPR wise, he did okay, and that's something that I do worry about in this game for tight end work, is Colston Loveland, who's a guy that I have been talking about all season long, almost to a detriment sometimes, but I do think this is a game that he could actually have some success here. So it does speak merits about how the running game and short yardage stuff for Michigan, and Washington's just going to be testing that secondary, because as good as Michigan's been, I think that there will be a situation in the first quarter, first half, where they get punched in the mouth. I do think they'll start to slow things down with Corum and keep the offense off the field, and that's going to be a momentum shift. But I think the first or second drive for the Huskies is going to kind of put the Michigan defense on its heels a bit, which I'm looking forward to. So Corum, yes, you don't have to necessarily get too different at the captain slot there, and it really is going to be contest based, like you mentioned. This is the last game. You want to do MME stuff, running just one lineup on a showdown that is this huge contest wise, unless you're playing a small single entry type of thing. You don't have to get too crazy at the captain if you don't want to. It's where you get in those utility spots, and there are some players that we'll talk about here. But I do like the idea of the McMillan play at captain. We know all three of the receivers, plus they've got some other guys in Jackson and Jeremy Bernard, who I'll talk about here in a little bit. But Polk and Odunze, who everybody knows, they were the ones that have the monster games. McMillan, there's a really solid chance he decides to come back next year, and this is going to be a pretty good spot for him, as he's now kind of fallen into the WR3 spot after he was WR1 for a season, and then the WR2 or 1B, I guess, to Rome's 1A. Injuries keeping him out of several games, at least four. Still, almost 40 receptions, 526 yards, 4 touchdowns, really, missing all that time. Still pretty impressive. He would have been a 1,000-yard receiver pretty easily. So I do like the idea of using him, because I think that defensively, Michigan's going to do a lot on Rome. They're going to try to. He's really good, hard to defend. Polk is well known, but I think McMillan's going to end up having 2 or 3 really big catches and scoring there. So I don't foresee him being a big captain play. I think most people would go Corum or to Rome. Those are going to be the 2 most popular for my money. So Jalen McMillan just makes sense in that regard to me a lot. What are some and then you mentioned Donovan Edwards. That's another guy. This Michigan team, like starting off the season, we thought, oh my God, Donovan Edwards is going to be so amazing. Was it that very first game of the season against, I think it was Tulsa, ECU. It was ECU, and they kept on the first 3 or 4 ECU games. They were holding like elite running backs down. It's like, what's going on here? And it just turned out Edwards is like semi-broken, coming back from a serious injury last year, and they really weren't giving him the carries that we expected. And Blake Corum, kind of a la Penn State, he's getting the carries, but he's not rushing for 100 yards, but he's still scoring 2, 3, 4 times. So it's been a really weird season for Michigan. But I do think Edwards could end up having a score here and ending up optimal. He hasn't really done it, but he's 5'4". I would have liked to have seen him even cheaper here, but maybe the 5'4" price keeps people away. Sitting there in the utility slot. I probably wouldn't captain him. However, if you're running, 10 plus, 20 plus lineups in that big GPP, a Donovan Edwards captain isn't the worst thing in the world, because he could definitely score once, maybe even twice here, depending on how many touches he actually gets here for this Michigan team. What are some of the other, captain's kind of obvious there. What are you doing with like strategy wise? Are you playing both quarterbacks, or are you saying, no, I haven't played McCarthy all year, I'm not going to play him in showdown, I'm just going to start playing, 2 running backs or all the receivers from Washington? What's kind of the strategy you're looking at for your build?
So you get into like, we always talk about like what's most likely to happen, and then you have to have some hedge lineups where like, what if like just all the weird stuff happens, right? And a championship game is completely something that is, where that's a possibility. Washington decides, okay, we're gonna make JJ McCarthy beat us and stacks the box with 9 guys, and there's like 2 corners out there trying to cover 5 receivers, and well, that's not going to work very well, right? And so, yes, I am going to have some JJ McCarthy exposure, and if I do, then it becomes a question. Well, I'm probably not going to have JJ McCarthy at captain, but I am going to need to have some receivers with him. Roman Wilson is the obvious one that I think everybody will go to if you're going to run a McCarthy lineup without McCarthy at captain. Roman Wilson is probably like the guy everyone looks to. Colston Loveland's probably another guy in that same vein. The difference is, I don't think that Washington is going to approach this the way they did, trying to contain Troy Franklin and Tez Johnson over the top. I think they're going to try to shut down Blake Corum as much as possible, right? And so I would actually prefer receivers that are deep threats, because of how I would imagine, this Washington defense is going to attack the Michigan offense. And so if anybody's going to get loose, it's probably not going to be the tight end over the middle, 12 yards down the field. It's probably going to be some deep threat burner type of wide receiver who, is in single coverage, no safety help over the top. JJ McCarthy shakes loose on a play fake and has the whole defense going one way and he's going the other way. And, maybe it's Roman Wilson. It's probably not Colston Loveland. We've seen flashes from Samaj Morgan more recently. Has been involved a little bit more recently. I don't know that like we're going to captain a Samaj Morgan necessarily. Like I don't know that it's to that level yet, but we have seen him be involved, and he's got kick return duty as well. And so that, kind of moves the needle up a little bit in his favor, that he's both running deep routes and also on kick return duty. He's extremely fast, and if he gets loose, deep in the secondary, good chance we finish that one off with a touchdown. Cornelius Johnson hasn't really been involved much, but we could see a little bit more of him. Tyler Morris hasn't done a damn thing all season, but 245 and a touchdown in the semifinal. And these guys are all cheap. Like these guys are not guys that I'm looking to captain, but they are guys that you want to consider, especially in a JJ McCarthy lineup where maybe you have a Roman Wilson or a Colston Loveland at captain, and you want to have another piece in the passing game to complement what Corum is doing in the running game. There are cheap options on the Michigan side to do that, that are going to see run, and none, it's not the same kind of offense where there's 3 main receivers that are going to be on the field for 80% plus of the snaps. They're going to rotate guys in and out a little bit more. And also just not have as many receivers on the field in general. And so I think you got to only pick one of those guys per lineup. With, I'm probably leaning most towards Samaj Morgan at only 1,800 as opposed to Morris at 3 and Colston Loveland even, quite a bit higher than that. But that's, the kind of alt build way to think about it is, picture a Michigan receiver getting loose deep down the field. It's a weird thought, I know, but picture it happening. Who is that guy? And there's not like a complete lack of precedent for it. Cornelius Johnson went absolutely bonkers in the game against Ohio State, not this season, but the season before, when Ohio State completely sold out to stop the run. So if Washington does that, we might see the opportunities for some big play action passes down the field if Harbaugh trusts JJ McCarthy to get it done.
Yeah, and the receiver I find myself liking is actually Corny Johnson. He, just a couple of seasons ago, led the team. I had 6 touchdowns. He was over 600 yards back in 2021. So he's been around for a while. He does have deep threat capabilities, has shown some PPR work as well. Early in the season, he was churning out double-digit fantasy point games. Only 3.8. I know Samaj Morgan is cheaper, and we got, him on our radar, mid-season from our guests there, but I just feel like Corny Johnson would be the one to kind of be a tough out for them and somebody to cover one-on-one. I could see him burning us a little bit. So he's the one that I definitely have my eye on and I'm watching, and it's probably somebody that would end up making a quote-unquote main lineup in whatever single entry that I'm going to run. On the Washington side, it's obvious with the 3. Like everybody knows, Rome Odunze.
Real quick, I want to stop you and highlight something in the Cornelius Johnson point. Did you happen to watch Michigan Iowa?
The first half, I did. I didn't watch the entire game. It was too hard to do.
I didn't realize this until I was going through her prep. He had 9 catches. It only went for 64 yards, but he had 9 catches against Iowa, and like that's probably the toughest defense Michigan saw all season, right? And so, when they have a tougher matchup, he did show up when they don't just get to run the ball the whole time. So it's feather in your cap for that. At 3,800, you're not getting much of a discount from what his expectation would be, but you're absolutely right on the head. Big game. Maybe it's time for him to show up. So, especially in a McCarthy lineup, he's interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just so much more expensive to pay for Roman Wilson at $9K, and to go back and mention the Iowa game. Like I tried to watch that because I had some exposure there to some guys. In the first half, it was just too rough, but they did make a conscious effort to make sure Roman Wilson wasn't involved. He had the 1 catch for 14 yards. So, if that plays out similar way, we'll see a lot of dead Wilson lineups potentially, and having much lower owned Corny Johnson there, especially if he scores. Would have liked to have seen him be like 1.82 as well, or 2K, but I think at 3.8 there's still some upside there. All right, so in the Huskies receiving room, we know they've got just NFL talent galore. Like Rome Odunze is going pro after 131 targets, 1,500 yards, 13 touchdowns. Jalen Polk exploded this year after being kind of more of a secondary option, taking advantage of Jalen McMillan getting hurt. 97 targets this year, 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns. And then you still have McMillan, who is still a rock solid guy, could potentially come back next year and have the season that Rome's having, and a full season of health, and then work his way into a potential first round guy. He has been around for 4 years, but due to the COVID season, he does have a year of eligibility left. And I'm starting to hear more and more there's a chance he returns. And as a health, no injury season last year, he did have over 1,000 receiving yards, which I know people probably already forgot about, as it's a what have you done for me lately situation. There are 2 other guys. There's multiple others, but there's 2 others that we can realistically look at to use, and maybe some sneaky captain-esque lineup here with one of them. Wouldn't be very wise in like single entry, but for that large field, 200K up top, you got to do some exotic things. But the Devin Culp, who didn't really take a step forward this year like many thought. He has dealt with injuries. He's been more of a blocker, but Jack Westover has turned himself into more of the receiving option at tight end. We didn't really use the tight end much to start with, but over the last month or two of the season, we've seen a lot more of him. 50 targets on the season, which is actually fourth on the team now, 41 catches, 391 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Heavily involved there in the Sugar Bowl, especially after Culp got injured and they really had to kind of make some completions, get those, easy ones, a first down or two. Westover was responsible for, caught 6 passes for 59 yards. Now, 5K, we're not getting a super discount. The last showdown slate it was with the Husky game, he was 2.6. So it's a little bit more of a tough ask there, especially if you're loading guys up top. We need to get a little bit cheaper, but he is somebody that you can use as a secondary option for sure. But I'm really looking at 2 other guys here, one being really fast Giles Jackson, but Jeremy Bernard is the guy, and I feel really confident in him breaking away for a touchdown in this game, especially with the defensive attention that's going to be paid on the other guys. Now, he's only 2.2K, caught 3 passes against Texas for nearly 50 yards. He also got a carry for 4 yards, and I did fumble, unfortunately, but he's gotten a carry in 3 straight games. He's just super fast, one of the fastest guys on the team, and they want to get him the ball in a myriad of ways. Coming into next season, we're going to be talking about Jeremy Bernard a lot, especially if McMillan ends up going, but we could potentially look at a Jeremy Bernard, Boston, who I was hyping early, but he's still super raw, and Jalen McMillan, which would be a fine receiver room with Will Rogers, who is transferring in to throw them the football. But this will be a good opportunity for people to learn who he is and get him at a very cheap price. And I can just about guarantee he's going to get at least 5 touches, whether that's 4 targets and a carry, 5 targets. Like, I feel pretty confident listening to interviews and reading beat stuff and just the local media around here. It seems like Bernard's just going to make a play. And all he needs to do is catch, one big one or a touchdown here to really pay off this cheap 2.2K price. And even if he only catches 2 passes for 20 yards, it's still not going to be the end of the world. It's somebody that's not going to bagel, or at least I feel confident that he won't. Some of the highlights of his season back against Arizona: 8 for 98. Had 5 carries in that game as well, 6 catches for 63 yards against Utah. So he is somebody with several games over double-digit fantasy points. He is a guy that is going to be a really key piece to this offense next year. And I think it starts here on the national stage with him making a big play. So that is the one that is the sneakier one. A large field GPP captain, sure, because if he catches a touchdown, like you're feeling pretty good. But a utility spot for sure in all formats. As far as the Giles Jackson play, he has just really not been super healthy. That's kind of the problem with him throughout the course of his career, but he is somebody who's sitting there at 3.2, is somebody who can get loose and bust a deep one. Now, last year, pre-injury, he was considered the fastest guy on the team. Now, there's a very good chance he does bagel and will play, but he has big-time upside catching a long touchdown as well. Feel a lot more comfortable in Bernard myself, but Jackson is just another guy there to be aware of. Hasn't played in many games this year due to the health issues, but he is somebody that you can look at to a degree. The running back situation as well, knowing that Dylan Johnson is going to be literally like self-admitted 60 to 70% of his capabilities, seems unlikely they're going to give him 20, 25 carries. So somebody else is going to have to get carries as well. And looking at the last few games, they've started to rely more on Tybo Rogers, not to, 15 plus touches or anything, but he's the one getting that backup work behind Dylan. 5 carries against Texas. He was pretty solid there, had 20, had a reception, 3 carries in the Apple Cup. He's been, getting some work here or there. He's 5'2", though, is the only issue. I was really hoping to come into it and have him be like, min price 1.8, 1.2, something like that. So they do put us to the test by pricing him up like that. And I suspect they did that because of the Dylan Johnson injury, knowing he's the number 2 running back in that room right now. But just know that if Dylan flares up early or, re-aggravates and has to sit, Tybo could be looking at 15 plus carries all of a sudden. So something to be in consideration for you when you're building your alt builds there. I agree the price is horrible at 5.2, but just it's a situational play there because he is going to be the one to get all that work. The other running backs in the room, they've all just kind of been guys here or there getting carries like Sam Adams, who I actually really like, but he just never got the work. So Will Nixon, who has shown flashes in the past, but obviously never getting the work. Newton, who was really good during the COVID year. He hasn't really played since. So there's a lot of different pieces here that you could try out, but Tybo is clearly the guy behind Dylan Johnson. What other plays in this game or just, any thoughts with this game before we get into props are you kind of looking at, or do you want to share anything that you noticed while looking this game over?
Yeah, it is frustrating on that Tybo price, because you could very easily see like Dylan Johnson being named a starter, a lot of ownership kind of flocking to Dylan Johnson, like, okay, they're going to try to stop the pass and drop 7 guys, and it's just going to be empty boxes for Dylan Johnson, and then you could see Dylan Johnson like hobble off the field on the second drive of the game, and Tybo Rogers be there at 5% ownership or something. And maybe the price does help keep his ownership down. I don't want to curse Dylan Johnson or anything, but I see that as like a thing that could get a lot of people on tilt. Like maybe he starts 8 for 63 yards or something, and then comes up limping, and it's the Tybo Rogers show, and that would signal Michigan to commit even more to stopping the pass. Right? They're not going to attack us with a backup running back. They might, and, especially the Oregon game. They just gave Dylan Johnson the ball and made that the offense for one game. And then, USC too, that was a whole different story. But I think the Tybo Rogers thing is pretty sneaky. Like if you wanted to go from like what the reverse chalk game script would be, it would be like JJ McCarthy throwing a bunch of deep passes for touchdowns and Tybo Rogers getting work out of the backfield, whether it's catching passes or running the ball. I do think that there will be a lot more passing work open underneath and a lot of quick throws for Penix. I don't think there's going to be, that traditional 7-step drop or deep play development available to him the way it has been sometimes. And that's no knock against the offensive line. I just think that Michigan has too much talent and schemes too well for him to have that available all game. So I think I am going to have a lot of Westover exposure in particular from that, in addition to whatever other receiver I like. And yeah, you hit the nail on the head with McMillan, him being the cheapest of the 3 by a good margin, makes him extremely popular. So if you wanted to, still play Penix, but get away from what a lot of people will do, which is pair him with Rome at captain, or Polk at captain, you maybe use Penix, Westover, and then like a Jeremy Bernard, all in utility. And that would allow you to use, Corum and at captain and maybe some more expensive pieces on the Michigan side, as kind of an alt build if you're getting away from the Rome captain thing.
Yeah, and when I was talking about Jeremy Bernard and Giles Jackson, I wrote a note down and then didn't go back to it. But Giles Jackson used to play for Michigan early in his career, and there's some very deep-seated hatred between the fan base and Giles Jackson. When we lost a game against Michigan in 2021, there was a viral video of him cursing out the Michigan stands. And there is a lot of funny, borderline hilarious tweets about Michigan fans saying we can't let Giles Jackson, win a championship before us. So, revenge narrative and possibly, a bit of trolling going on there. We'll see if Jackson is able to step up and make a big play there against his former team. But just wanted to share that as a thing that I saw there. People are not happy with him. All right, so we get into the prop market here. I think we've kind of broken it down there, giving you a pretty good idea and where to work there and how the different game scripts could play out. Now we turn to the prop market here, and I pulled up where I saw on BetMGM First of all, 99% of the bets on BetMGM are on the over. That tells you anything. And then the most popular player props are the following. And this might surprise you. JJ McCarthy over 190.5 passing yards is the most bet on as of yesterday, which is, I guess, makes sense to a degree, but also wow. Blake Corum over 101.5 rushing yards. I did see it at 99.5 in other places. Michael Penix over 297.5 passing yards, the third most popular. Then fourth is JJ McCarthy over 1.5 passing touchdowns, plus 125 on BetGM. That's pretty interesting. And then the fifth is Michael Penix over 1.5 touchdown passes. That's minus 175 because that seems like a mortal lock. So those are the most popular player props on BetMGM. I just wanted to kind of share those before we got into PrizePicks and anywhere else. Knowing the popularity of JJ McCarthy props, that's interesting. But what are you seeing on PrizePicks for some of the more advantageous numbers that you're liking?
So I'm a big fan of Jack Westover over 2.5 receptions. I think with all of the attention going to the big three receivers, I think he'll be open underneath, and Penix, has that quick decision making ability and accuracy to get it to him, and did it quite frequently against Texas. So I like him over 2.5. I probably would have liked him over 3.5. So I think you're getting a decent number there. Interesting to see that Cornelius Johnson has as high of a prop number as he does on PrizePicks. 40 over 4. He's got the total of receiving yards at 43.5. So they're expecting him to be the second most prolific receiver on Michigan. I don't necessarily have an opinion on that. I just thought it was interesting from a DFS perspective. I'd also like Blake Corum over 7.5 receiving yards. They used him, out of the backfield a good bit of, twice, but he was very effective at it. And in competitive games, I think there's probably going to be more of a tendency to use him as a pass catcher out of the backfield, where typically that's been a Donovan Edwards role. But they don't want to pigeonhole themselves into him being a runner. So, you get one catch out of Blake Corum, decent chance it's going over 7.5 yards. And so I like that number a good amount. I like Jalen McMillan over 69.5 receiving yards. Beat it to death with all the attention on Rome Odunze, but it's true. And he actually has a higher prop than Jalen Polk does. So interesting to note there with the discrepancy in DFS pricing versus what the prop markets are showing us on PrizePicks. So I do like him over 69.5. Not that I don't think Jalen Polk will also get over 57.5, just that their numbers are what they are. Probably going to shy away from the Corum over 101.5. I think they not that I want to take it under, but I would be normally very inclined to take a Corum rushing over just in general. I think that is what Washington tries to sell out to stop. And so probably going to have to beat them in other ways. And I also, I think McCarthy over 1.5 touchdowns, pass rush or receiving. I think that, there's going to be, like we talked about, so much focus on stopping the run. As gross as it is, I think that this is the game where JJ McCarthy not shows the world that he's Superman, but shows the world that he's a quarterback that is competent and can get the job done throwing the ball down the field. I don't think this is a game where they will just refuse to throw the ball for an entire second half like they did against Penn State or whoever it was, where they're just no, we're going to run it every single down. I think they have to open it up a little bit, and I do see the stacking the box strategy leading itself to, a long passing touchdown here or there, which you could get JJ McCarthy over his 1.5 touchdowns pretty easily. The only negative with that is if that guy gets stopped at, the 5 or later, that's going to be a Corum touchdown. Like Corum gets it every single time. But Washington knows that too and could be selling out for Corum. We might get one of those JJ McCarthy bootlegs after a play action to Corum, right? So, expect the unexpected in the championship game. These teams have had some time to strategize for this, and we'll try to break tendency. So, pair, especially on PrizePicks, pair your stuff with other stuff that makes sense with it. Take the Cornelius Johnson over with the JJ McCarthy, over touchdowns, things like that. But yeah, I think my favorites are the Corum over his 7.5 receiving yards, the McMillan over 69.5, and the West over 2.5 receptions are probably where I'm at. Not a lot of unders. I think, overall, this is a pretty fairly priced game. There's only one game for them to worry about, so it kind of makes sense. But nothing like super glaring other than the West over receptions.
Yeah, and I agree. Like the Corum rushing yards, I don't touch that either, because there's been how many games this year where he's been under 100 and scored like 3 touchdowns, still hit his 20 fantasy points. So any Corum prop I want is his fantasy score, which they put at 19.5. Like, just got to hit that 20. Feels like 50 yards, 2 to 3 touchdowns. I'm just hitting that over there for Corum. Also like the Jalen McMillan over 13.5 fantasy points. I think it sounds like we're kind of both in agreement that McMillan's gonna step up in this spot here. Also, there are the kicking stats here. Grady Gross of Washington, who has been pretty clutch, 6 kicking points. I like the over there. I don't usually talk about kickers, but 13 against Texas. 4 extra points, had the 3 field goals, 10 against Oregon, which was another 4 extra points, 2 field goals, and then 9 a couple of weeks before that against Utah. Only 2 against Oregon State because that ended up being a rough game, and 6 against Wazoo. Pretty consistently 3 of his last 5 hitting over 6 kicking points. So I'm riding our guy Grady Gross here, who's been super clutch. I couldn't look at him the other day, that game where he had the late field goal, but he came through for us there. My lunch was on the floor with me, but I got one more in me if Gross has to kick a game winner or something. And then looking at the receiving yards, they did put Polka at 57.5. While I do like McMillan a little bit more overall for this game, I feel like the Polk yardage under 60 is just begging for an over. There's a spot for all 3 of these guys to hit their over. Speaking of Rome, Jalen, and Jalen. So over 57.5 receiving yards for me on Polk is another one that I am definitely looking at. And I see the AJ Barner receiving yard. There's been a lot of people kind of hyping Barner. I still think Colston Loveland's the better tight end, but I do see Barner getting some hype. I was a no bet there, but I see 15.5 receiving yards. I bet they get some money on the over for that one tomorrow. All right, so that pretty much takes us to the end here. I want to get from you a tried and true, a slate breaking player from you in Satline if you got one, and then of course your score prediction if you got one of those as well.
Okay, so we're gonna go with Samaj Morgan, 4 catches, 80 yards, and 2 touchdowns. One of them coming on special teams. As our slate breaker of the day. So if he does all that at 1,800, especially if you have him at captain, you're going to be doing really well and really different. And then score prediction, I'm gonna go Washington 31, Michigan 27.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. But so my slate breaker, I got to drop one here. I'm gonna go with Jeremy Bernard. I just I'm how I am with these kind of unknown receivers to the masses. I don't think he's gonna rack up any PPR work. I think it'll be like a 2-catch, 105-yard touchdown performance, which maybe not necessarily break the slate, but at 2-2 over 100 yards and a touchdown, I just feel like Jeremy Bernard's going to come up huge for us in this game and possibly be the reason why they end up winning. My score prediction, I'm going to go 35-31 in favor of the Huskies. Another late defensive stand against JJ McCarthy and trying to find Roman Wilson at the, from the 20 or something like that, where I'm just going to be dead on the floor like the last few games. But I just feel like that's going to be inevitably what happens. Appreciate everybody who stuck with us this whole entire season, from August to now. It's crazy how fast it's actually gone. And kind of switching gears to college basketball, and it's already, we're going to be talking about March Madness in the tournament. This stuff just goes way too fast. But, it's something that we enjoy. It's less of a job for me and way more fun. And I am very appreciative of all of you guys who continue to support the show. And Jake, all the hard work that you've put in this season and jumping on. And I know you had some injuries and you had some other stuff going on, and we both had some sickness. And last year I was like in the hospital and you stepped up. So I appreciate you putting in just as much work into the show and the content that we do as well. Looking forward to another fun season, which will be here before you know it, but it'll be summertime and we'll be looking at all these rosters and gearing up for 2024-25. So thank you very much, my good sir, and appreciate everybody else. We'll be back tomorrow night for the CBB version of the show, but this will be us signing out for the last time for the college football season. Go Huskies, beat Michigan, America's team. Let's go. One more game. Let's get it.